Chris Elliott, founder and director of Leman Micro Devices. Chris is a fellow of the UK Royal Academy of Engineering and a UK barrister specialising in regulated engineering. Technology has caused revolutions in many areas of our lives, from the way we do banking, book taxes, to even how we find partners. Similar opportunities exist within the healthcare sector. However, it also opens up many concerns for users and challenges to the industry around the privacy of the service and its security. Therefore, Chris's presentation will look at the analogy with other domains to anticipate what might happen to health and describe some of the issues that we will have to address to achieve trusted and secure solutions. So, Chris, take it away.
Thanks so much, Joe. We've seen in the last few years an explosive growth in connected medical devices, internet connected particularly. And I want to look at just where that's heading and some of the implications for security and for privacy. So, first of all, a bit of speculation of where it's going. Not easy. That line, predictions are difficult, especially about the future. Lots of people claim to have said that first. I like it being attributed to Niels Bohr because he's another scientist. But it's certainly true that predictions are usually wrong. But what we can do is extrapolate by using analogies with other experiences. And as Joe said in the introduction, I'm going to look at a couple of them. So let's just take banking for a start. I remember when I was about to go to university, my father took me to meet his bank manager. And it was a great ceremony, and I opened a bank account because I was going to be independent. And the whole thing was very patronizing, very limiting. The bank was telling me what I could do with my money. And they're all the same. I still bank with the same one many years later. But that was a very strange setup by modern standards. It was organized by branches rather than by the central bank. It was very inefficient. It was frustrating to me as a customer. The service was poor. I was powerless. There's not much I could do except whatever the manager told me. And it cost the bank a lot of money. And we've seen that transformed by technology. And I'll come back to how technology does that, but that's been completely altered in my working life. Another example is taxis. Go back 10 years. If you've finished a meeting and you want to get a taxi back to the station, you phone the taxi company and they are programmed like a robot to say, it'll be with you in 10 minutes, regardless of how busy they are. And so you wait, and 40 minutes later, your taxi turns up. It was frustrating for the customer. The service was poor. Again, as a customer, you're powerless. And it's expensive for the taxi operator because they have to pay the telephone operator to spin that line. The common message in these two examples, and you could look at many others, you could look at, I say dating was one that I mentioned, but many other things where new technology has made a big difference to how we work. The common message is that the technology didn't create something new. It made what we've done, what we've always done, easier and more customer friendly. The technology is a win-win because we get better service at lower cost to the service provider. What we've seen is a whole number of small quantitative changes, small changes in how we access the information and how we pass it around, which add up to a qualitative difference. There were incremental changes that go far beyond that. Instead of thinking initially about replacing one part of the system using technology, you redesign the whole system based on the technology. And that's what's happening with banking, taxis, and many other areas. Now, that's two industries that have been transformed. Where is health at the moment? Well, a few observations about the health sector. First of all, the treatment you get depends very much on which practitioner you choose. We've been going for 2,500 years since Hippocrates and his oath. And we're still just discovering evidence-based medicine. It wonders what they used before they decided to use evidence. The whole process is very subjective. Clearly, there's a huge amount of data involved, but it's compartmentalized. It's compartmentalized by institution. So one hospital will have access to all your records for all your treatments. You go to the hospital down the road and they've never heard of you. It's also compartmentalized by speciality. If you've got a condition that requires 2 different doctors to treat you for different pieces of expertise, each one will have to do a full set of analysis and record taking because they're have great difficulty sharing data. And the thing that runs everywhere, we see this, the costs of health are exploding. So thinking back to what I said about banking and taxes, how might we see that sort of transformation for medicine? What could the technology offer us? In fact, more generally, how would we redesign healthcare to exploit the technology? Well, I pick on 4 key developments driven by technology that I think underpin a massive change. First of all, new types of personal medical sensors. We've been through 3 generations. The first ones just measured what was easy, the inputs to your health. They were simply toys. How many steps have I done today? The second generation, they're starting to measure things that are a bit useful, but they're not very good. They're not clinically trusted. But the third generation that's now emerging actually measure what doctors need to get clinical accurate vital signs. And as an example, that is one of the prototypes of my company's product. That bar up at the top of that phone is a sensor that measures blood pressure, temperature, and a whole load of other characteristics, all of them to clinical accuracy, as accurate as the measurements you would make in the doctor's office. And it's cheap. It's a few dollars. It's being built into phones now. It will soon be available. So that's one big change, the sources of data. What about the interpretation of that data? We're seeing artificial intelligence starting to make its mark in diagnosis and in guidance to doctors. That's the screen from the Ada app, which is free to download. And if you haven't, I strongly recommend it. It's most impressive. I am not a shareholder of Ada. I am a shareholder of the previous example, but I just think the Ada product is brilliant. And whenever I've tried it on really quite complex diagnosis, it works because it's captured the considered wisdom and experience of hundreds of doctors. Another area we're seeing in many fields and just starting to come into medicine, what collectively is big data. How do we analyze and exploit the amount of data we've got? A very positive use of big data. And the fourth area, which is more of a medical one that I can see happening, it's back to this side of evidence base, but system diagnosis. And what I'm thinking about particularly are the things like the autoimmune diseases, which have many causes, many symptoms, and they may present as many different apparent diseases, but there's an underlying common cause. And teasing that out, understanding it, and understanding which treatments actually are treating the root cause and which are merely mitigating the symptoms, that requires data, analysis, sensors. It needs all of this, but potentially there is a breakthrough to be had in things like the autoimmune diseases. So that's the sort of transformation we could see. Where would that lead? Well, a number of changes. I would say, just as we saw with the banks, with taxes and everything else, a qualitative change in how we access healthcare. The difference between my company's sensor in that thing and the device in the doctor's office is a few $100s, but that's nothing in the cost of healthcare. What's really transforming is the next point, that it's turning the patient into a consumer. They're no longer patient in the other meaning of that word. They're going to behave like consumers, and just as we now do with the bank. When I went to my bank when I was about to be a student, I was a very humble equivalent of patient. I did what the supplier told me. I now regard my bank as a supplier to me, and I call the shots. I think there's a big shock coming to the medical profession as its patients stop being patient and start behaving like consumers. And then my next points really go together. The consequence of this is faster access to more consistent healthcare at lower cost. Now that alone adds up to a revolution. Take it with the next point that we get more healthcare for more people, wherever they are in the world, even if they're not near big cities, all at lower cost. It is transformational in the way that we deliver health, and we're going to see it in my lifetime, at least, providing the healthcare system keeps working in my lifetime. It's going to change radically, just as banking and the other things have changed. But that then raises the key question, which is the subject of this afternoon's talk. That what's going to happen with privacy and security? What I'm saying is that set of transformations leads up to something so different. Another quotation, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Some people attribute that to Ronald Reagan, but I have an age where it's a song by Bachman Turner Overdrive. But we are going to see things changing in healthcare that we've not seen before, which raises a whole load of issues now about privacy security. This is a massive problem. It's very important for making this come about, and I'm not going to be able to do justice to it in 20 minutes. Also, I don't want to take the bread out of the mouths of the very many expensive consultants who'd like to advise you on this topic. So what I'm just going to do is describe some of the thinking that we're doing in my company as an illustration of the sort of things you've got to worry about in order to be part of this transformational revolution. So starting with privacy, what have we got to do? The key, the driver for these transformations is data. Accurate, it's got to be available wherever you need it, and of course it is very personal. It's about my health. I'm only going to let people do it to me, use these techniques on me, if I trust them. Now that is possible. We trust our banks with our money, which is very sensitive personal information. We can arrange to trust with our medical data. But for that, we've got to do two things. First of all, say trusted. People aren't going to use a service if they don't trust it. A lot of the companies in this area worry a lot about the legal requirements, which is my second point. But you have to also believe for your customers to believe, not just that you've satisfied the law, but their data actually is safe. And this is a very complex business. Just looking at the legal point, it's very complicated around the world. In the EU, we probably have the most complete set of legal protections for data in the GDPR. It's very exhaustive and very demanding. California has recently introduced CCPA, which interestingly expressly excludes medical data, but it shows the way that American states are moving in their privacy law. China at the moment works through a rather complex set of laws and standards which are non-binding, but you'd be in a weak position if you failed and hadn't followed them. And there is a draft law which is actually last week went before the National People's Congress. So that's going to be, I'm sure, coming through soon. India, which is another country we're interested in because of the huge number of potential customers. There is a draft bill with the Parliament. It's actually inspired by and resembles quite a lot of GDPR. But there's just 4 jurisdictions, 4 parts of the world, 4 different sets of rules. And if you want to see this technology running worldwide, which clearly most of us in the game are trying to do, we've got to consider all of them. There's a number of things that come from this because following the GDPR terminology, special personal data, which includes health data, needs extra care. So legally as well as ethically or from the point of view of trust, we have to take extra care over health data. Number of things. First of all, moving data across borders. There's recently been a European Court of Justice case called Schrems, or Schrems 2 to be precise, which is reinforcing this fact. Data has got to be processed in a safe place. And in particular, countries where the government presumes it has the right to access all private data are not safe. Clearly, we can't make medical data anonymous. Because if it was anonymous, the next doctor you see wouldn't be able to look up your records. So we have to find ways, or ideally we will find ways, to de-identify it. The GDPR calls that pseudonymous, where it can be found, but a simple access to the database won't disclose who it is. But that sets a new set of requirements for how the data is handled. We've got a conflict. On one hand, we need to provide access for medical practitioners. We need to be able to access the data for it to be any use to anybody. But at the same time, we've got to maintain security with this wide range of people who may need to see your records. And another load of people who don't want to see them, perhaps. So trying to balance those two requirements is very difficult. And take my last 2 points together. This data that we gather from people and the analysis that's done in it and the artificial intelligence that's applied to it has huge value for research, for medical research, because it allows us to tease out rare correlations or small statistical effects, and from that learn about underlying processes. Very valuable for advancing medical science, and of course very valuable to the companies that develop treatments and drugs. One of the principles that I think a lot of us in this field are adopting is that although that data has to be available, it is owned by and always remains owned by the user, the patient. So we need to devise structures so that the data can be used for research without compromising its privacy, and that the owner can withdraw from it. Or to put it another way around, the owner should be rewarded for making it available. That's something that's been talked about in other types of personal data, but in health, it is first of all more sensitive, and secondly, of more value to society. It's immensely valuable to society that a drug company can develop a new treatment, less important whether a supermarket knows about your buying habits. So reconciling those two is going to be what brings a lot of the benefits of the transformation in health. Privacy then, a complex subject. All of these issues in the law and in the attitude of the public are risk-based. Because if you take a literal hard rule, you'll never be able to share data. So it all involves, as we're used to in the medical device industry, trading off risks and rewards to find the best balance that suits everybody. So that's the objective in privacy. Of course, the other side is security. If our data is compromised, what that then breaks the privacy. So we need to look at how we create a risk-based approach. What's the probability this will go wrong, and how serious will it be if it does? To security and the vulnerabilities in our data system. I can just give you a little insight into the way we're thinking about this. We started off looking at who might do harm. So here's a short list, and there's a rather longer list than that, but it gives an overview. And top of my list is actually organized crime. The simple motive, extortion, that an organized criminal can demand payment from a company because it has, or claims that it has, cracked secure data. And it's a very profitable venture if you can get it right. The sums of money that people sometimes end up paying in Bitcoin or similar untraceable currency are very large. The reason I put this top of the list is because cracking one person's health data in general is not a big consequence. Clearly, if that person is is a candidate for president of the United States, then getting access to their health files might be rather important. But from a company point of view, the threat is various forms of extortion, threatening denial of service or threatening to publish confidential data. Second on my list are commercial rivals who really follow the same sort of approach as extortion, but with different motives. There's the organised criminals, with different motives. They may want to discredit their rival. They may just want to get your trade secrets. And then when you get down to unauthorized service, where somebody wants to put a pirate app on the phone, for example, or a pirate AI system interpreting the data, that's still serious, but it's a smaller or narrower consequence. And then what I called the private hacker, who curiosity, that is serious if it turns out to be a very high profile target. But generally speaking, those people are well protected in other ways, and getting the potential president's mobile phone and jailbreaking is not quite so easy. So there are some really quite serious threats. And of course, the person I've left out on this is Mr. Cockup, the mistake, what the financial traders call the fat finger. Somebody does something wrong in your organization, or of course, one of those people in my bad actor list actually is a former or current employee, but somebody just doing something wrong and releasing data by mistake. Those are all among the threats that we're trying to take out. There's a term used in this world of privacy by design. We're trying to design the systems so that the risk of these things happening is acceptable. Just as we design the medical devices so that the risk of causing harm is acceptable. And so I've looked at this, I have to say, from the point of view of a company making the sensing end, and I can see there might be a different list of issues for others, but the sort of things that we're worried about, the personal devices themselves, there are other apps. They may be using Bluetooth or near-field, NFC, near-field communication. They've got to transfer data to databases. At the other end, there are the professional devices. In the doctor's office, the equivalent of the hospital notes, so I think they will cease to be hospital notes, as I was arguing earlier, but if you like, your notes that the doctors need, the data transfers to and from databases. And then, of course, the databases themselves are vulnerable. The professionals who refer patients on to the right specialist and have to refer them on with all the information. And then something that's a really complex issue, I mentioned earlier pseudonymization, de-identification. That's actually very difficult because it's sometimes possible to infer who somebody is from collateral data, putting together 2 or 3 different databases, finding the overlap, and hence finding who the person is. So collateral data is very dangerous. It's been recognized in the intelligence community. It's a very powerful tool. 2 unclassified pieces of information put together can make a very high security risk. And just one more issue to think about, and I'm sure there are many more, but this is another one we're concerned with, internet connections. To refer back to the Schrems decision and GDPR, if your data is routed through a third country that thinks it has the right to intercept any data coming from outside its own territory, then it becomes vulnerable. The standard trick that's used in financial fraud, the pirate IP address, so you send the money to the wrong person. Those are just a few of the things where the system we're going to devise will be vulnerable. And we've got to put in place the procedures, the protocols, encryption, separation between layers, wherever possible, provably secure pieces of code. All of the things actually that the military and the intelligence community have known about for quite a long time and know they're very difficult. We're going to have to apply that quality of security before we will achieve both the legal, but more importantly, the trust privacy that is needed. So just a few conclusions. First of all, the challenge we're talking about is like establishing personal banking, but much, much bigger. Banking only has one kind of transaction, and that's lending money from one institution to another, either from me to my bank when I make a deposit or from me to my bank when I borrow some. And everything else are variations on that. There are different types of security and so on. But essentially, it only has one kind of transaction. Whereas in medicine, there are many different conditions, there are many different treatments, much more complex. There are also many different types of actor. And as I've been hinting at before, the medical world is very strongly divided into tribes who each have their own culture and way of working, and yet they're going to have to cooperate more and more as this comes about. Something they have in common is that both banking and medicine have a very long history, going back thousands of years, of established ways of doing things. And one thing we have seen that what the technology does is undermine established ways of working. So it's going to be transformational again. First of all, the challenge, as I said, is bigger, but also the prize is much bigger. If you look at it in money terms, 10% of the world's GDP, $8 trillion a year, goes on health. Banking is worth about 500 billion, the banking itself, not the money it's shuffling around, but the banking is an order of magnitude smaller than that. But we're not just worried about the money, though that's an important part of it. And a simple statistic, the difference in life expectancy between a rich and a poor country is around 30%, something like 50 years and 70 years, or maybe 55 years and 75. Very big difference. That is unacceptable. We cannot tolerate that. It is quite unnecessary in a modern world with the sort of technology we now have available. And for $8 trillion, we ought to be delivering a very big improvement in the health that everyone achieves. And that's just a simple measure of health, life expectancy. When you look at the quality of those extra years, or the years that are made up, that too can be greatly improved. So we will see once again, as we've seen in other fields, technology being a great leveler, providing we can deliver it safely. Another thought is that with secure and private ways of cooperating in medicine, we can get a coherent and optimal response around the globe. So that's applicable in two ways. First of all, to emergent threats like COVID-19, we've had 1.1 million deaths so far, and I'm recording this in October, so it's already at that level. That needs a coherent response, and we've seen the world is struggling to align best practice everywhere, but also to existing threats. Hypertension kills the same number of people every 6 weeks. That's why I work in blood pressure. That's why it's so important. So that's another one where we can deal with it, but we need to deal with it coherently around the world, share best practice, share data. The technology exists to do that, to make a transformational change in the global healthcare environment. But for that, there's something we've got to do, as I keep coming back to it. Can we build that secure infrastructure that people will trust, that will actually allow that transformation to occur? And maybe that's the wrong question, because I've no doubt that we can do it. We've done it in banking, we've done it elsewhere. We have the tools. Do we have the political, legal, and commercial structures and willingness to do that? Thank you very much.